Sorry, I'm 1 minute late. Uh, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, welcome to the 13th meeting of the sixth session of the Working Group on the Strengthening of the Biological Weapons Convention. This is a public meeting being held in an in-person format in accordance with the regular practice under the convention. It's also being broadcast live on UN Web TV. Before continuing our substantive discussion, I would like to thank Mr. Ushan Ahmed of Pakistan, one of the friends of the chair, on the topic of organizational, institutional, and financial arrangements, for ably leading the informal consultations on that topic yesterday afternoon. I understand that you had detailed and productive discussion on the topic and will return to it again on Wednesday afternoon. Turning to today's business, I will shortly reopen the floor on the topic of measures of compliance and verification, and particularly on Section D of the rolling tax for any additional interventions from state parties. As with the previous topics, I will also ask the Implementation Support Unit to present the cost estimates for measures proposed on Section D. Once those discussions have been exhausted, as I mentioned yesterday afternoon, I will suspend the meeting so that we can have informal consultations on compliance and verification, which will be led by Ambassador Inden Bosch of Netherlands. I would like to flag that if we finish our deliberations on the topic of measures on compliance and verification later today, I would suggest that we continue with a rolling agenda approach and then move on to the next and final topic to be considered by the session of the working group, which will be measures on national implementation of the convention. If the pace of discussions on national implementation is as fast as on the other issues, it's possible that we could finish deliberations on all the topics allocated to this session of the working group well ahead of schedule, maybe even today or tomorrow morning. I'm aware that we should reserve some time on Friday for the consideration and adoption of the procedure report of this session, and we will have another round of informal consultations on organizational, institutional, and financial arrangements on Wednesday afternoon. But we may still be facing situations in which we have meeting time with no topics allocated. In this situation, I would suggest that we return again to the two mechanisms and spend most of the rest of the time available to us working on the key outstanding issues in order to try and reach convergence. During our stock-taking discussion on Friday afternoon, a large number of state parties identified the mechanism as a priority issue. So it seems logical that we devote more time to them. But I would appreciate your views on this suggestion and would encourage you to share them with me bilaterally. So I would now like to reopen the discussion on measures on compliance and verification. Do any state parties who have not yet made interventions on this topic wish to do so? Or do any other state parties wish to make additional intervention? The floor is open. Malawi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving my delegation the floor. Malawi aligns itself with the statement which was delivered by South Africa on this topic on compliance and verification. Chairperson, in the previous discussions on this topic, Malawi has always supported the need to have a compliance and verification regime under the BWC, as we believe that this is an important tool for strengthening the convention. More importantly, verification under the convention should aim at building confidence and trust not only between states, but also with other stakeholders. Apart from building trust and confidence, it should enhance nature implementation through capacity building and international cooperation. My delegation therefore supports your proposal, Chair, and notes with gratitude that papers which we submitted together with other like-minded states like Denmark, Panama, Thailand, and Norway, just to mention a few, have been taken into consideration in the discussions of the proposed open-ended working group. Chairperson, Malawi also supports the proposal for an open-ended working group on compliance verification, which is open to all state parties. In addition, we support the development of a legally binding measures by the working group to be legal. We support the development of measures to be legally binding without prejudice to national security and more especially sustainable development. On paragraph 23F, we support the proposal for the working group to address potential investigative measures to rapidly and credibly investigate allegations concerning possible non-compliance. However, such investigations should be conducted in good faith. In our previous interventions, Chair, on the same topic, we stress the need for the initiative not to be a tool for political witch hunt, but a tool to enhance national implementation. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. Any other delegation? Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. My delegation aligns itself with the statement by the Africa Group pronounced by South Africa. We recognize the importance of compliance and verification measures in order to shore up compliance with the conference. The goal of our work between states is to protect populations against biological threats, and these measures, however, must remain balanced and adapted to the realities in different states. For my country, it is essential that these provisions contribute to collective security, whilst facilitating international cooperation and preserving the role of scientific and technological development for peaceful ends. With respect to the text before us, we welcome the recommendation for an open-ended working group on compliance and verification measures. We consider that such a body open to all countries and member states should be an essential framework to ensure transparent, constructive cooperation. With respect to 23J, we take note of the importance of balance in engaging expertise. We take note of the Panama contribution to reflect parity between men and women. To conclude, we call on all states for constructive dialogue in the spirit of pragmatism in order to shore up the credibility and efficacy of the convention to benefit all. Thank you.
Merci, la Côte d'Ivoire.
I thank Côte d'Ivoire.
Any other delegation? India.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, for giving my delegation the floor. My delegation underscores that compliance and verification are central to strengthening and institutionalizing our convention. Rapid advances in biosciences together with COVID-19 pandemic have exposed our vulnerability to catastrophic biological events. There remains a significant gap between what has been achieved thus far and what could be accomplished on compliance and verification in our convention. India has consistently called for negotiating concrete measures. After an impasse of more than 25 years, we must acknowledge how biosciences and biotechnology continue to reshape the threat landscape, creating new pathways for activities inconsistent with the BWC. We have a few observations on the section D of the rolling text that you proposed. We are examining the paper. We do not have specific textual edits, but more like general observations. We welcome your proposal to establish the open-ended working group, which will dedicate its efforts on the issues of compliance and verification. Paragraphs 21 and 22 of the rolling text, in what appears to us, outlines the purposes of the verification, which includes building confidence, deterring non-compliance, as also providing timely and credible evidence of compliance and non-compliance. In our view, these objectives must be clearly defined and harmonized, since different purposes demand different levels of scrutiny. Similarly, we need clarity on what is the target of our verification measures, whether it is any illicit bioactivity at any time or significant unusual activities over the long term. At this stage, a less detailed and a more open-ended approach, as suggested by some delegations, may be better suited for facilitating consensus. In this regard, we would suggest trimming down details in paragraph 23. Going forward, we must examine how biosciences and biotechnology and related facilities shape verification and how S&T advancements create both opportunities and challenges. We are particularly interested in how future verification efforts can address threats from illicit actors and terrorists. Previous work under VERIX, the ad hoc group, and the UNDC's 1988 verification principles provide useful guidance. But important questions remain: whether traditional verification models apply in the biological context, whether reliance on lists and thresholds is feasible, or whether qualitative approaches may be more appropriate. Verification must be applied equally and in a non-discriminatory manner to all states parties. The current Article 6 is, in our view, contrary to that spirit, and in our view would require some amendment. For long-term sustainability, measures must be anchored in legally binding agreements. A science-based approach is essential, including the ability to distinguish between natural outbreaks from deliberate incidents. Industry engagement, exploration of managed access techniques, and designing verification as a part of a multi-layered and mutually reinforcing system of measures will be crucial. Chair, lastly, we stress that the open-ended working group must function on the basis of consensus. Verification should focus on the negative obligations of the convention. CBMs, while important, have a separate mandate and cannot substitute for declarations, which must remain at the core of verification. I thank you.
Thank you, India. Any other delegation? Huh? Sri Lanka, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My delegation welcomes and thank you for the proposal under Section D of the rolling text. Sri Lanka supports the negotiating legally binding verification mechanism. Absence of a robust verification mechanism could lead to disparities in national compliance practices and national implementation process. A verification mechanism should be applied to all states without any discrimination. Therefore, Sri Lanka underlines the urgency and importance of negotiating a legally binding verification regime. Sri Lanka is annually submitting its CBM and values the transparency and confidence building measures which are complementary to the future verification regime, while recognizing that CBMs cannot substitute a robust legally binding verification mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Lanka. Any other delegation? I see none. Thank you. We seem to have exhausted the list of speakers for this morning's session on this topic. As I mentioned earlier, we will now therefore hear a brief presentation from the Implementation Support Unit on the cost estimates for the measures on compliance and verification proposed in Section D of the rolling text. Mr. Fix, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As we have done on the previous topics, we'll present now very briefly the cost estimates for the activities that are mentioned in section D of the rolling text. That's the section that we're discussing now on compliance and verification. So as I have said in previous presentations as well, and just by way of background, it bears repetition, the cost estimates that we have provided before and that we'll provide now are based on the following documents and experiences. Particularly for this one, we are taking a lot of information and a lot of the costs from the cost estimates for the meetings of this particular intersessional program. So the cost estimates that were adopted by the 9th Review Conference, you can see the document reference number here in the first bullet, which are the cost estimates for the meetings taking place from 2023 till 2026, including this working group. We have also drawn on information that was provided to you in a background information document that we submitted to the preparatory committee for the 9th Review Conference. Again, you can see the document symbol referenced in the second bullet here. And we are also basing, less so in this particular case, but also on the experience that we have had while implementing activities and also the experience from other international organizations. For this particular topic, for the cost estimates, there are two key paragraphs in section D. Those are the paragraphs that you can see here replicated on the screen, namely paragraphs 27 and 28, which are the basically the operative paragraphs referring to the proposed open-ended working group on compliance and verification, which is obviously the only element within section D that has any cost implications to it. You can see the text replicated here. We have based the cost estimates that we'll present in the next slide on the, excuse me, on the mentioned number of days in paragraph 27. So that's 20 days, as you can see, that was mentioned in paragraph 27. So here, just very briefly, are the cost estimates for 20-day per year meetings for the open-ended working group on compliance and verification. Now, I would also like to emphasize that the costs that you can see here, the different elements that make up those costs. So the conference servicing costs include interpretation, obviously, into all official languages, for meeting services, translation and production of documentation for the meeting, and also various other conference servicing requirements. These are all exactly the same as are spelt out in the cost estimate document from the 9th Review Conference that I referred to a couple of minutes ago. All of those costs are itemized there as well, and they are standard costs for meetings here at the UN office at Geneva. I would also like to note that the program support costs at the standard UN rate of 13% are built into this figure as well. So you can see that the cost estimate for 20 days meetings of the open-ended working group on compliance and verification per year would be just under $600,000 per year. That's the cost estimate that I had to present to you. As with the previous presentations, we will put this on the website for this meeting as well, so that you can access these slides there as well. Mr. Chair, I'm obviously happy to answer any questions, respond to any comments that delegations may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Fix. And are there any questions on the presentation just delivered? The floor is open. USA.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. And my thanks again to the ISU for preparing cost estimates for the measures under discussion. I had a point of clarification for a question for the ISU. I think earlier when cost estimates were provided for conferencing services, it was estimated that each day, so 6 hours of meeting time and translations, would cost $50,000 US, 50. And so I'm curious if that is different when we're talking about something that is 20 days long. I want to make sure the numbers add up. So that's question number one. And question number 2 is whether or not this accounted for any staff time for the ISU in order to facilitate those meetings, or whether it's purely conferencing room cost. Thank you.
Thank you, SA. Mr. Fix, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the United States for the questions. So the costs per day, it's kind of useful sometimes to take an average, but it also depends on the exact nature of the meetings and of the documentation that is required for those meetings as well. The one fixed and fairly standard cost is for interpretation. That is the same every day, the same every session if we use all 6 languages as we do for the formal meetings. The thing that can vary from meeting to meeting will be the cost of documentation and translation and production of that documentation as well. So it will vary from meeting to meeting. The MSP, for example, will have a slightly different documentation workload than this working group does. The proposed working group on compliance and verification would again have a slightly different documentation workload as well. So the differences are down to that documentation workload mainly. We, again, obviously can't predict right now what the documentation workload exactly would be for this proposed working group, but based on our experience, based on previous meetings, we have come up with the figure which I just presented to you. In terms of your second question on ISU staff, no, there are no staff costs incorporated at the moment into the cost estimate that I just presented. That is purely for conference servicing costs. So no ISU staff costs are included in that cost estimate I just presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Any other comment? I see none. Thank you. We seem to have exhausted the questions for Mr. Fix, so I would like to thank him for his presentation and the information provided. As I mentioned earlier, I would now like to switch to informal consultations on the topic of measures on compliance and verification, which will be led by Ambassador Robert Indenbosch of the Netherlands. We can remain in this room to take advantage of the presence of the interpreters. But please give us a couple of minutes to switch to an informal session. The meeting is suspended. Is it going to take until 12? No.
I don't know. I mean,
The
it really
others-
depends.
you.